Hey, everybody. I know I've been kind of MIA for last week. It was Thanksgiving, so we didn't do a Financial Friday Q&A and tip of the day. And I normally on Thursday would provide you a heads up about what we were talking about on Friday. And yesterday turned out to be such a busy day that I didn't get it done. But today, what I want to do is to bring to your attention a proposed change to the Higher Education Act of 1965. So these laws are things that most people don't know a whole lot about, what authorizes what and how do you get what and what it all means. But this is really important, and it's very important if you have an income-driven repayment plan, because it is through the change proposed to the Higher Education Act that your income-driven repayment plan is going to be changed. So this week, both the Wall Street Journal and the Chronicle of Higher Education reported on a proposed change to the Higher Education Act of 1965. And the law is called Prosper, and it proposes a whole bunch of changes to the Higher Education Act. So just a little bit of history if you're not aware of this. The Higher Education Act was funded in 1965 for the first time, November of 1965. So it's having a birthday this month. It was signed. And the point of the Higher Education Act was to provide resources to small colleges, financial resources to small colleges, and also to provide resources directly to students. So it's under the umbrella of the Higher Education Act that federal financial aid exists, including student loans. So a change to the Higher Education Act, especially as it affects funding to students, is really important. So this is the part that you really need to hear and pay attention to. And that is, under the proposed change to the Higher Education Act, public service loan forgiveness would be eliminated for anybody who is not already participating in the plan. So if you are eligible, and there are an estimated 30% of student loan borrowers that are eligible for public service loan forgiveness who have not enrolled. If you're eligible, and if there is a benefit to be earned by you under public service loan forgiveness, you should enroll immediately. And if you're listening to this and you know somebody who's eligible who has not enrolled, they should enroll immediately, because if you're not enrolled and this change to the Higher Education Act goes through, you will not be grandfathered in, and that benefit of public service loan forgiveness will not be available to you. And if you're not aware of what the benefit is, what the public service loan forgiveness does is it allows you to work for 10 years for federal, state, local government, or a 501c3 or a state chartered not-for-profit. And at the end of those 10 years, whatever you have not paid on your student loan, both interest and principal are forgiven, and that forgiveness is tax-free. That part of the College Cost Reduction Act of 2007, they are proposing eliminating in the update to the Higher Education Act. So that is a really important thing to know, is if you're eligible for public service loan forgiveness and you have not enrolled, if this law change goes through, you will not be allowed to enroll, and that benefit will no longer be available to you. My tip of the day for people who are already enrolled in public service loan forgiveness is that you should be scrupulous about your participation going forward. You want to make sure that you make every payment and that you make it on time, and that you do your re-enrollments or recertifications on time. I've not seen a specific rule about this, but it is my belief that if you do something that impacts your eligibility to the program, like you don't certify on time, that might be a reason to say you are no longer eligible for the program and that you won't get the benefits. Now, there are other things that are in this proposed law that you should pay attention to. So I will say once again, you can read about the proposed law on the Wall Street Journal, and you can also read about it in the Chronicle of Higher Education, what's being proposed. So there are prophylactic rules that the Obama administration put in to protect students, and those were penalties, mainly to private for-profit colleges, that if the students who graduated from their program did not get work at the rates at which they promised, that there would be penalties assessed. One of the things that this Higher Education Act does is it removes those penalties. Now, the other thing that the proposed change does to the Higher Education Act is if you're not in public service loan forgiveness and you are in the income-driven repayment plan where you're going to be paying for 20 years and then paying taxes on the amount that's forgiven. If you're in that program, one of the proposed changes to that program is to put in caps. So the original law that created income-driven repayment plans had a proposed cap of $57,000, so that it would cap what you were forgiven at $57,000. And what that would mean is that you would still be able to enter into the program, but your relief would be based at $57,000, and that any amount that exceeded that, you would have to pay. So, that's a real, important thing to know. The average student loan debt is somewhere around between $30,000 and $35,000, but those are mostly kids who go to state universities that have that amount of debt, and it's not uncommon to go to a private or religious school of higher education and have debt much, much higher than that. And particularly for graduate students, there are almost no subsidies available for graduate students anymore. So, this is particularly something that you should pay attention to if you're thinking about going to graduate school and using student loans to pay off your graduate school cost. It certainly says that your strategy, if you're planning on going to graduate school and using loans, that it's far better to try to pay your ongoing living costs out of your income or out of assets, and just use the student loan proceeds to pay your tuition and fees. So, right now, people who go to graduate school quite often borrow for both, and they often have pretty substantial balances when they're finished with graduate school. It's not unusual to see six-figure balances for graduate school. So, this is my second tip of the day, is this is a law that you want to track if you're planning on going to graduate school and using student loans to pay for it. Because if this change to the Higher Education Act comes through, then the amount of money that you are eligible to borrow and be forgiven as a graduate student is likely to be substantially less than it is today. And today there is no cap. So, today what we decided to do instead of doing a tip of the day about a concept in student loans is to bring awareness to a proposed change to the Higher Education Act that will impact every borrower of student loans. So I'm really urging you to pay attention to this law. I'm urging you, if you're going to be impacted by the law, to talk to your congressman, I should say all of your members of Congress. That's your senator, your representative. Let them know how you're going to be impacted by this law, and that if you've already committed to education, how you're going to be impacted. If you're not yet committed to education, how you're going to be impacted. A generation ago, the United States saw participation in higher education as being a substantial part of its readiness to lead the world. And, obviously that seems to be changing when you can look at these kinds of draconian changes to laws that already exist that provide great value and benefit to student loan borrowers. So I'm going to cut today a little short. We're not going to do quite 15 minutes, but I do want to make sure that you are aware to look it up. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal this week on the proposed change to the Higher Education Act. There was also an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education on the proposed change to the Higher Education Act. Either way, read the article. If you're affected, please do talk to your members of Congress. If you have a potential undergraduate, you might want to rethink affordability as you look at what schools you're considering going to, but you definitely are going to want to know what the cap is and make sure that you keep your borrowing under the cap if you anticipate participating in an income-driven repayment as part of your strategy to pay back your student loans. So it's Financial Friday. Our Q&A and tip of the day are about changes to the Higher Education Act that will impact every borrower that is using income-driven repayment or public service loan forgiveness. Tip 1 is that if you're eligible for public service loan forgiveness and you have not yet applied, you need to do so immediately. If you're in public service loan forgiveness, you will be grandfathered. Tip 2 is if you are considering going to graduate school, you need to take into account that there's likely to be a cap on loan forgiveness if you're planning on using income-driven repayment to pay back your student loans. And tip 3, if you have a student who's about to enter undergraduate school and is using borrowing to pay off their student loan debt, there is likely to be a cap on the amount of student loan debt that is dischargeable under any income-driven repayment plan. And you want to make sure that you choose an institution where your repayment obligation is going to be below the ceiling of what is dischargeable if you enter into an income-driven repayment plan. So I'm glad to be back. I've missed you guys. This has become an important part of my Friday. So I'm C. Cole Dillon. Today's topic is the proposed changes to the Higher Education Act. Please do become aware of this act and how it might impact you if you are a student loan borrower. I look forward to seeing you again next Friday for Financial Friday's Q&A tip of the day. Thank you for listening.